welcome to the annual European Rheumatology Congress 2019 here in sunny Madrid. Thank you very much for joining us here on Eular TV on day one of the Congress. My name is Rheumatology and I am an academic rheumatology trainee in Liverpool in the UK. And I will be one of your hosts for the next 3 days on Eular TV. However, I won't be alone. Here we have...
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephanie Shoup-Borrell and I'm a Research Associate in Epidemiology at the University of Manchester. Now, I'll be taking you through the paediatric highlights of this Eular Press conference, and that's Press Paediatric Rheumatology European Society, and not Press Conference, which is more like what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So today on Eular TV, we're very privileged to have two special guests with us. So we have Leanne Kersley-Fleet, who is the lead researcher for the UK Biologics Registers, and she's based in Manchester in the UK. And we also have with us Associate Professor of Paediatric Rheumatology in Cape Town, South Africa, Professor Chris Scott. Thank you very much.
Welcome to both of you. Now, I was very fortunate earlier today. The first thing I walked in on was Leanne Kersley-Fleet receiving her award for the best clinical abstract. So well done, Leanne.
Thank you.
So your work was focused on what to choose, a second TNF or an alternative class of biologic for patients with JIA who have failed their first TNF. I wondered if you could briefly take us through the conclusion from that work.
Okay, so we looked at patients who where an initial TNF inhibitor was ineffective and found that there was no difference in those that improved in their disease activity or their functional ability on those that switched to a second TNF inhibitor compared with those that switched to an alternative class of biologic.
Interesting.
That sounds really interesting, yes. So I believe you had quite a lot of JIA patients in your cohort. I was unfortunate not to attend your session today, so do you think you could expand on what your cohort, the characteristics of your cohort for me, please?
So I use data from the UK Paediatric Biologics Register, which are two parallel studies, the B-SPA etanercept cohort study and the Biologics for Children with Rheumatic Diseases study. And together we have over 2,000 children and young people with JIA who are on biologic therapies.
It's a huge number of children. So you've just told us, Leanne, that if you fail a first TNF, you have similar outcomes if you go onto a second anti-TNF as if you go onto another biologic. Now, wouldn't we expect you to do better if you went onto a second different class of biologic?
So that is certainly what we have seen in the adult biologics register for rheumatoid arthritis, that those patients who are switching to an alternative class, which is rituximab, are more likely to have improved disease activity and improvements in their function compared with the patients who are switching to a second TNF inhibitor. So we thought that might be the case in children with JIA, but this apparently was not what we saw.
So what would your message be to patients who might be switching right now off of their first TNF?
I think a message to patients would be that if they are switching from a previous biologic, to not lose hope. There are a lot of biologics out there and they all have very good outcomes. Just talk to your doctor, choose which one is best for you. It's a joint decision, so whether you want daily injections, weekly injections, monthly injections, this is all really important in making sure that the drug works.
Thank you so much, Leanne. So here we saw one of the key pieces of research from an early career researcher, and we see it was such a good piece of research it won the Best Abstract Prize in the clinical section. Now, in one of our other sessions today, the Eular project in paediatric rheumatology, we saw Johannes Roth from Germany talking about fostering this next generation of early career researchers, and in particular translational researchers. So he suggested that our main challenges might be, firstly, just the sheer number of new diagnoses of different kinds of rheumatological conditions that we have. Secondly, he highlighted this huge amount of new technologies and new resources we have. So that includes new omics data and new ways of analysing those omics data. We've seen amazing registries, such as the one used by Leanne Kersley-Fleet. So what we really need is to foster collaboration between early career researchers that are learning these new techniques. And that could be at conferences such as Eular here. We also need to be able to get these early career researchers to the conference itself, and we know it's quite expensive. So Johannes suggested here that we push more resources into getting these early career researchers firstly at the conference and then networking with each other. And that will not only mean that we have better research presented at the conference, but will also mean better care for our patients. And those patients are not just based in Europe, this is for patients on a global scale, which brings us across here to Associate Professor Chris Scott. Now Chris, your work focused on the global challenge and opportunity for paediatric rheumatology diseases. And you suggested in your talk that by 2050, 4 out of 5 children globally will be living in Africa, South America and Asia. And there might be countries within those regions that have sort of lesser resources. So in countries that have lesser resources, how much of a priority is paediatric rheumatology?
Thank you very much. You're 100% right. That 4 out of 5 children will live in the developing world, and that's because these countries have young populations. 60% of children in the developing world are actually young people. This is a very different statistic to the rest of the world. But sadly, pediatric rheumatic diseases are absolutely not a priority for governments in these areas because of the overwhelming burden of infectious diseases and other causes of mortality and morbidity that's seen in these areas. And so this has obscured the actual disease burden of pediatric rheumatic diseases.
So to understand this disease burden, your team sent out a survey to these lesser resource countries. I wonder if you could talk to us about that survey and what the challenges might be in paediatric rheumatology here.
Yes, we sent out a survey to most of the caregivers that we could find in the in less resourced countries as part of the JAMLIS survey to ask them what are the challenges in diagnosing and managing juvenile idiopathic arthritis in their areas. And we were not surprised to find that there were major problems with TB, tuberculosis, HIV, malaria, other diseases that may mimic juvenile idiopathic arthritis and further cause delays in diagnosis. We also found that education and lack of awareness was a major problem, both amongst healthcare workers and physicians, healthcare workers and patients, and the community at large. And we found that there was a critical lack of pediatric rheumatologists. We probably, by some estimates, supply about 12% of the world's required pediatric rheumatology workforce at the moment, and most of those are centered in Europe and North America.
Gosh. So what opportunities do we have to enable these lesser resource countries to access more paediatric rheumatology specialists?
Well, given that the majority of the burden of disease of JIA actually is in the less resourced countries, Eular and PRES have taken the lead in establishing a pediatric task force tasked specifically with improving the training and education and delivery of care to patients in less resourced countries through the task force and who are living with JIA. So the task force will set about exploring innovative solutions to achieving this, and we'll be collaborating with our colleagues in Europe and North America, and with all the interested parties in the countries involved. And we already have some innovative ideas for pushing this agenda forward.
Thank you so much, Associate Professor Chris Scott. So Professor Chris Scott there was talking about this new task force, and just after he spoke I heard Professor Helen Foster talking about this same task force, and one of her main points that she raised was that actually this isn't just about people from Western medicine going into these lesser resourced regions and teaching them what they need to know. Actually, these regions have their own way of dealing with these diseases. They might not have access to drugs such as the biologics that we heard from Leanne Kersley-Fleet. And actually it needs to be a shared conversation between Western countries and these other countries globally in order to better research in both paediatric disease but also in adult disease. And Renalini, could you tell us more about the adult conference?
Yes, absolutely. So after our wonderful opening ceremony this afternoon, I was fortunate to go to the Win and Hot session, which was on osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. So the first part of this session was on osteoarthritis and was taken by Prof. Berenbaum. And so I'm just going to tell you one highlight from his talk, which I found very useful. So the prevalence of osteoarthritis is increasing, and this is across all ages. And in fact, the FDA in America has now branded it as a serious illness. One thing that particularly struck me from Professor Berenbaum's talk was that the prevalence of prescriptions of drugs such as opioids is also increasing because of the burden of chronic pain which comes along with this. So this tells us that we need new targets and new therapies for treatment in this area. One particular therapy that has been given particular attention in the general press is mesenchymal stem cell use. So stem cells are cells that have the potential to differentiate into any sort of cell and have the potential for use in osteoarthritis. However, the evidence base for this is very weak at the moment. So Prof. Berenbaum told us about a trial he's currently involved with, which is called ADIPOA-2, and this is looking into the mechanisms by which mesenchymal stem cells may work. So, for example, do they have anti-inflammatory effects or anti-catabolic effects? And in turn, this may lead to new and novel targets for therapy in osteoarthritis. The second part of the Win and Hot session was on osteoporosis, and this was taken by Prof. Ferrari. A particular highlight for me was Prof. Ferrari's description of recent work on the drug rheumatolizumab. This is an inhibitor of the molecule sclerostin, which has a key role in bone formation. Rheumatolizumab itself has a dual effect, so it promotes bone formation while at the same time preventing bone resorption, and we await further trials to see how useful it will be in the prevention and treatment of osteoporosis in future. So those were my particular highlights from the afternoon session.
They sound absolutely fantastic, and I look forward to day 2.
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much for joining us here on Eular TV for day 1 of what has been a great congress so far. Thank you very much to Leanne and Prof. Scott for joining us as well. We'll see you here tomorrow. Thank you very much.